Hey guys, welcome back to the build of the Boomerang Super Elan. We are making some great progress on this aircraft. We have gotten all of the servos installed in the last video. This video, we're getting into the finer details of the aircraft and all the little bits and bytes inside. So let's dive into this build. So we are going to start off with prepping and painting the lenses. So we need to tape these off. We tape off the lens portion and the outside portion so we can paint them. Now the whole point of doing that is I use CA to install these. The CA kind of looks ugly and we've got, little funny areas and stuff like that. If you use shoe goop will yellow in sun. So when we paint this, it just makes it a nice finished look. So we're gonna do that, get that ready first. What that also does is that pulls our wings off and allows us to start dealing with wiring. So we've got the receiving portion of our wing wiring to do. We still have the receiving portion of our boom wiring to do. So quite a bit of wire running, and we're gonna slowly work our way into the equipment section. So let's work on those lenses first. Okay, so we've just been putting some coats of white paint on the wings. Obviously ended up going with the white option. And because we're using the Tamiya paints, they tend to be fairly thin. So you have to do a bunch of thin coats in order to cover. So this is 3 coats so far. And we're letting that tack up, and we'll probably put a 4th on at least the top side of the wings. Okay, so moving back to the fuselage, I was going to start running wires for the booms, but first thing I want to do is we got to do a little bit more sanding on the woodwork on the top of the fuselage for the smoke tank. So I'm going to get that done first. Reason I'm doing that first is just so we can get rid of all the mess to begin with, and then we'll start running the boom wires and that type of stuff. In this back end, we also need to still sort out our gear door servos, and we'll do that before we install the turbine so we've got good access. So we'll pull all this electronic stuff out, get our vacuum set up and our Dremel, and we'll do a bit more sanding on the top side. All right, so we've got all of our wiring cut here for all of our booms and wings and all that stuff. So, so far this plane, just so you guys are aware, I think the 2 rolls of wire that I had, or bundles of wire, for this stuff was 100 feet, and we've almost gone through the whole thing. So there's a little bit left. I think it was 100 feet. I could be wrong. But anyways, so we've got our wire cut here. We're gonna make all of our ends up first. Now I did this on one of the previous builds. I actually put all of our servo connectors with labels and all that stuff on, and we're gonna do the same thing on this one. Part of the reason is we've got the trays where we can hide all of our wires underneath, which is going to allow us to hide any excess wire that we have. So if we're 6 inches too long, it just gets buried underneath the tray. So gonna get all these wires done up, wiring harnesses done up, and then we get to install them in the plane. Okay, so wiring harnesses for our wings and booms are both done, and we have to get those installed still. Before we run any of the tanks and start working on the cockpit or the front section here, we need to get all those wiring harnesses run. I also did up 2 connectors and extensions for the top and bottom light, so those are all done, marked, ready to plug in. So next thing we're going to work on is getting the wiring harnesses run. And while I'm doing all that, I'm also making my harness to go from the nose section to split the two. So we're basically doing the same kind of thing. We're putting an ash lock connector in this area, getting all of our wires run to their appropriate locations, and that'll be our last harness that we need to put together. All right, so we've got our first wiring harness run from the boom here, and just like everything else, I've glued this in place so our wires can feed in and out of the booms, but they're not going to get stuck inside and disappear. Our wing wiring harness, we've got to come out right there, and it's going to come out to this point and then go into the fuselage with the rest of this bundle. We've also extended our gear lines here as well too, using our solder stick connectors. So we've just added a piece of wire in there, and we have the same connector and everything on the end. So once we get the wiring harnesses run to the center part of the fuselage, then we have to work on the gear doors for the mains, which is these 2 spots right here. The reason we need to get those done is we want to get the wires run forward. I've already made the extensions for that. We want to get those finished and complete before we put our turbine in and lose our access to that area. Okay, we pulled up all of our prep for the lenses, and they look awesome. So white was a good choice. It really blends in with that wing and it almost disappears. So you can see in that previous clip compared to now, we've got a little bit of cleanup to do, but it really helps to make all of that stuff that was visible before just completely disappear. So nice touch, nice look, and happy with the way that those lenses turned out. Okay, so as we're getting ready to start installing stuff in the front end of the aircraft, we need to do any final drilling of the stuff that's going in the front. So we've got 2 through fittings in this area. The first one is the big 1-inch one that's going to have all the servo connectors and everything come through. And then the second one is the smaller 5/8 size one up by the ECU. And that one is having all the connections that are coming into that area going through it. So we'll drill these out now, and then we will be able to vacuum everything up before we start running wires into this area. All right, so moving on to the gear doors on the mains. Now, the openings for the gear doors are not normal sized openings, so we're not able to use a standard servo. We could make the gear door openings bigger. The problem is our depth. So from that wall that this mounts to the wing tube, you've got 22 millimeters of depth, and we need a little bit more than that. We need 25 millimeters of depth for that to fit. So we could space those out as well. Given this some thought right now, we don't really need to use this big of a servo, but we can also use the MKS HV69s. Now these have 10 kilograms of force, so I'm thinking we may use these guys as well. So we're gonna have to give that some thought and see. These ones fit in the pockets. They're actually a little bit too small for the pockets. Servo opening is the next size down from a standard servo, whatever that's called, a mini servo, I think. And so we may go this route as well, just giving this some thought right now. All right, so decision has been made, and Ward can confirm we went back and forth quite a bit between the full-size servos and the mini servos, or whatever these are called, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and yeah, it's these little 69s, HV69s will be awesome. Ended up going this route. All we had to do is add an extra piece of wood to make the opening smaller. As you can see there, we put the little infill pieces of wood. They're high solid in place, just waiting for them to cure. So while we were waiting for them to cure, I kind of got the gear doors set up. Now these gear doors are designed to, if the gear's in the up position, they're designed so the doors open, gear comes up or down, and doors close. Now the instruction sheet is a little bit wonky for this controller, but if you go on the JP gear, they've got a pretty defined programming solution on there, and it's fairly straightforward. You just hold down the mode button to get into the first step, and there's kind of three different sequences to go into. So once you figure that out, it's actually very simple. So we can't install those servos yet because we're waiting for the high sol to cure. So I think what we'll do next is we will start to put our little notches here in the turbine section for the turbine to fit. So these rails are a little bit too tight, and we just need to create a little notch, a little U-shaped notch for the fastening for the bracket to fit into. All right, guys, so we got the turbine put in place here. We'll pull this out and I'll show you the little notches that we have. Very, very easy to mount that turbine, especially because there's no tail cone or tail pipe. Really simple. And there's a shot from the back end, so we're nice and centered and good to go. Obviously, we have to put our smoke nozzle in still, but looks good. All right, and we've got our wiring harness kind of done up here initially, but rather than fighting with getting all this stuff positioned, why not just take the nose off? Bolt is going to be nuts. So I used red on all these bolts, thinking we would never take the nose off, but you know, things change. Now,
okay, got it.
So the reason for this was just to get our wiring harness pasted up in place and everything, and have easy access to our connector. We can just take the nose off, glue all this stuff in place out of the aircraft, and then put the nose back on and we're all good. So just much easier to deal with it in this format. All right, so we made up a carbon plate for our Cortex to mount to, and Ward actually asked a really good question: why are we doing this? So let's cover this. And I suppose this deserves to be a tip time. So this tip time has been brought to you by Trusty, Bent, Screwdriver, and Ward, because Ward asked the question. Okay, so a couple things here. We could take the Cortex, put the supplied double-sided tape on the Cortex, and stick it in place. Now, the one downside to doing that is in this situation, because we put the texture finish on, this texture finish is just like paint chips in clear coat. So it comes off. And obviously you don't want this to come off in flight because that would be bad. The other downside is, you know, wherever you mount it on these plates, you don't have full contact in some areas, right? So that's another downside. If we take this Cortex and we mount it to a solid plate that's movable, like this carbon plate, it's carbon laminated plywood, we can put 4 screw holes in the corners. We can screw this guy down, and then if it's very easy to move because this whole assembly moves, and obviously we could transfer it to another plane very easily and all that kind of stuff. So this is definitely my preferred way to mount it in most situations, but your results may vary. Okay, so we've got our gyro, our Cortex Pro mounted to our carbon plate, mounted to our front tray here, and this fits obviously in the front of the aircraft, so that part's good. So next thing to do is work our way backwards. We're going to do our other connector up here. Sorry, the lighting is a little bit terrible. So our other connector that plugs into here for our nose steering and gear door and stuff like that, and we'll get those run to this area, and then we pretty much have, I think, all of our wiring done except the gear doors for the mains back there. So we've just been waiting for the high sol to cure. It's starting to kick off now, and we should be able to get those servos installed now. So we're probably going to work on this portion next. Okay, so we've got the gear doors installed with the servos, and this worked out actually really, really nice. I'll give you a close-up shot there on what it looks like. And the nice thing about this setup right here is you can see the linkage is all in line with each other. So when the door is closed like this, it's not putting much load on the servo at all, because it's not the servo motor holding the gear door closed, it's the linkage being straight in line with everything. So it's going to work out really well. We've got everything sequenced as well, so let's operate this gear and see what it looks like. Okay, so this is just the mains at this point. So we'll do gear down. The doors closed when the gear came down, which is perfect. I just got to tend this wire here. So now we'll do gear up and the doors will open. and close. Perfect. So you have a little bit of adjustments to do there, but very happy with that. All right, so before we shut it down last night, I put 2 of the XT60 plugs on the sidewalls here. So I did a little bit of sanding on the sidewalls, high solid those in place, ran a bead of a CA on top there to hold it in place, and those are now cured overnight. So that's going to be our turbine plug. This is going to be our lighting and smoke plug, and then the 2 black ones in the middle are going to be for our receiver batteries. Now those receiver batteries, those plugs are just going to screw into place. But that's our whole battery setup. And then I also retracted the front landing gear and checked to make sure that our 2 battery trays would fit up there. And those are the quick release battery trays we've been using. So we kind of have our game plan in place for the front section. Now we need to start working on our back section forward. So what we're going to do is we're going to get all the wires run next. Now I want to put a clip down in this area. I guess that's right where the intakes are here, right? You can see there. So we want to get a clip down in that area to hold all the wires nice and snug. And then those wires are going to go underneath here, and that's going to be the game plan. Now I was thinking about just running the wires. Maybe I'll put some zip ties around them, but first we're going to get the holder down here in place. Once that's in place, then we have kind of our wire lengths and everything already set. All right, and there's a really good shot there of the cable holders. So those little plastic holders, they've got double-sided tape on the back side, so I stick them down, and then I use shoe goop to make sure they never go anywhere unless you want them to, because they will come unattached. So we've got one on that side, one on the other side, and then I've put some zip ties around the wire bundles. So now we'll run the wire bundles into this front area. Now we're basically gonna have the wire coming out in 2 different locations. So this location here, they are coming out, but they're gonna be placed back in. These are basically the lighting hookups is what they are. And then all of our other wires come out the front here, like all of our gear wires, control wires, all of that stuff comes out this front location, and then it gets distributed to the different items. So all of our wires have been run to their appropriate locations, so that step is good. So we got 2 more wires to run. Those are the gear wires from the mains. So we have to figure out the best path for those and run those forward as well to this location right here. So one of the considerations that I always give when I'm doing the mains is what's the best path for the wire so it doesn't get pinched. Now part of me thinks that if we put a hole through this former right here and run it right there through the hole, that might be the best option. The problem would be that when this gear closes, we want to make sure that it's not going to prevent the door from seating down all the way. So those are some of the considerations to think about. The other thing we can do is put that spiral wrap on, fasten it to the leg like this, because there is some space between the leg and the top of the wing. And I'm just worried that it might get pinched between the leg here and the woodwork. So it takes a little bit of figuring out to get this, to find the best solution. But ultimately you want to have it so the line's not getting pinched and it moves freely. Now I do really like how they routed these lines on the actual gear itself. So they use screws, and I think this is great. Just a great way to fasten that. So let's see if we can figure this out. Got to get this done next. All right, so I ended up using snakeskin instead of the spiral wrap. I think it's going to be better. And so put a zip tie right here. I don't think that's going to interfere with anything. Ran the snakeskin up and then CA'd it to the former work right there. And we're just sitting inside, little cutout there. So I haven't cycled this yet. I don't know if it's going to work. So this will be a first for both of us. And switch. And I think that looks good. I just need to see what it looks like when it comes down.
Gear down.
Yes. Perfect. So that's kind of what you're looking for. So this location right here, when the gear goes up, it kind of pushes the wire and it's sitting out like this. But that is good. It doesn't get pinched in the little archway there. So that is very good. Awesome. Like it.
Gear down.
Beauty. So that's a good solution. Nice and clean, nice and simple, and no interference. So we'll do the exact same thing on the right leg now and match that up. All right, so it is vent fitting time and then tank time. So we've got two DreamWorks vent fittings. These are basically what I use on all my aircraft and all the builds that we do here at the lighter side of RC. So we're gonna get these put in. Obviously one is for fuel, one is for the smoke system. Ideally, I would like to have them on the bottom of the plane, but we've got no access because all this stuff is built in. So what I'll do is I'll install it right in this area here, and it'll kind of be right on this angle right there. You can kind of see and tell where that's going to be. So the benefit of that is easy access, visible, and not that we need it on this aircraft, but if we're using a taxi tank, very easy to access right there. So these are some of those things that I haven't really spent any time showing in any previous videos. So I'll show you how I install these vent fittings. We've got our 9/16 wrench, which fits over the nut. We've got our Align hole making tool, All I think is what it's called. This is how I make the hole in the fuselage. And then of course, our vent fitting itself. So let's get this installed. Okay, so step number one, deciding where this is gonna go. And we're gonna go right about there. It's kind of the halfway point. There's a former right here, and then obviously the intake duct. So we'll just go at that halfway point. And just to keep it easy to access, we're gonna go right there. So the nice thing about the hole making tool, and the other reason to do it right here too, is there's lots of fiberglass and structure right there. Sometimes if the aircraft is very, very thin, or the fiberglass is thin, when you install the nut on the inside of the aircraft, it can squish the fiberglass or Erics and damage it. So sometimes it's okay, but sometimes I'll put a plywood backer in there as well too. So and then with my Align tool here, I'm going to, I think number 9 is what I generally do. But just keep going until we find the right size. Yeah, number 10. It's actually just a little bit under 10, so like 9.5 is perfect. Yeah, we got lots of structure there. I can see carbon layers and stuff, which is good. So I like these to have just a tight fit to them. Like this is pretty much perfect. And you kind of have to take it and almost thread it in. But so that's the first step in this. Now what we'll do from the inside is we'll get this nut installed, and then we have to hold this with like channel lock pliers while we turn that nut. So, okay, so there is what the inside looks like. So what I'll do now is grab my channel lock pliers. So these guys right here, and I will hold the nut from the inside with my wrench and turn the outside here. Make sure we use those the right way. Obviously being careful of the finish. Now you can turn the nut on the inside as well. Both ways work okay. There. So that is how we install the vents. And then if you want to use them, you can use the stoppers. And then from the inside, obviously we're cinched down. Now we've got pretty decent access there to put our tubing and stuff on, so that should work out perfect. We can just reach in there with pliers, slide it over top, and then run it wherever we need to for the fuel or smoke tanks. So we'll get the other one installed on the other side, and then it's time to start working on the tanks. All right, and it is tank time, not tip time. Tank time. So we've got our stock standard fuel tank, which we're using. We've added the brackets as we've shown previously. We added the 90-degree vent fitting because our smoke tank, which is a Carf Ultra Flash main tank, is going over top, and it will sit just like that. So what we need to do is prep these tanks and get them ready for install. So as far as prepping the tanks go, it's a pretty simple process. Step one, obviously we're gluing our pieces or mounting pieces on there, which is already done. Step number two, we need to rinse these guys out. Now what I like to use when I rinse out tanks is isopropyl alcohol. I like the 99% stuff, and the reason is it evaporates. Very simple. Don't use water. If you put water in these tanks, it's going to take a long time for that water to dry out, and just not a good idea. You could use fuel, but of course it's going to pick up all the little debris and everything that's in these tanks, the dust, and we want to get rid of that dust, so we wouldn't want to reuse that fuel. So that is what we're doing next. So we'll just simply pour about 500 milliliters of alcohol in these tanks, swish it around, dump it out, pour the remainder of the liter in there, swish it around, dump it out, and then our tanks are ready to have the pickups installed. All right, so tank time. Our tanks are rinsed, cleaned out, all good to go. So we've got our stock bung, which we put together in one of the previous clips videos, and we used red Loctite to put that together. The tubing that comes in the kit, it's nice tubing. It's not fake Tygon tubing, it's poly tubing. So very similar to the Virilison clunk tubing that I get, some other poly tubing that comes with DreamWorks high flow fuel systems and stuff like that. So good tubing, no problems with that stuff at all. So we're going to use this probably on vent lines and things like that. So we're going to use this inside the fuel tank. We'll use this inside the smoke tank. Probably that's going to be determined by our fitting sizes. So that's kind of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. I've only got one rigid piece of tubing in an oversize left. So I have to use the tubing that fits over this best, and that's the black stuff. So anyways, what we're going to do to set this pickup line up. So it's pretty straightforward. Obviously, we just got to get our length correct here is what we need to do. So our pickup or bung fitting is on this side here, and it's going to sit just like that. So our tubing is really coming right to the very edge of the tank, and then we want to have the rigid piece of tubing in the center, and we want our clunk to go all the way to the bottom corner. So what I'll do is first we're just going to cut this tubing using our tubing cutters, get this guy installed. So that goes on about 1 inch-ish, and we'll make sure that our clunk is a good length. And then we will install this piece on, like that. We're going to tie wire all this stuff, and we just get it sized for the bung fitting like that. And that's how we size these things. Now, we can put this together, thread it in. Obviously, we're going to double check everything, but that is exactly what we're looking for. It's going to come to the bottom corners of the tank, top corners of the tank, so that is perfect. So let's get this all put together, and then we will tie wire everything as well too. So all of our fittings, we're going to tie wire, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and we will install this. Now when I put this in, I put a little bit of silicone lube on the O-ring, and that's all you need. Don't use Loctite on here, just a bit of silicone lube, tighten that down, and you're good. All right, so we put both tanks together here. I've pressurized them. Now when you pressurize these things, guys, you just blow into one of these ends and you clamp it off. You do not use compressed air. It doesn't take much to expand these things, especially on the thin Carf tank here. This thing is a little bit delicate. So what I'll do now, these things just had pressure added, is I'll just take some soap and water. This is just dish soap, Dawn dish soap, and just spray it around the bung fittings. And reason for that is just to check the obvious stuff, right? Like if there's a leak, it'll start bubbling and show up right away, and I want to deal with it right away rather than waiting a couple hours to deal with it. So those tanks both check out good, no issues at all. So we will let those sit for a while, and if they're still holding pressure after an hour, 2 hours, we are good to go with the fuel tanks. All right, so these tanks have been sitting for a couple hours now. Let's check them and see what happens. So we'll just undo the clips. Still holding pressure. Undo the clip. Still holding pressure. So tanks are good. All right, so main tank is screwed in place. We used 4 wood screws on the front and 4 servo screws on the back. So that is awesome, mounted, done, easy. Now the smoke tank, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use silicone to glue this in place. And we're just gonna put some on the front of the tank, some on the back of the tank. Now, if we ever need to get these tank systems out, fairly simple, we unscrew the main tank. This slides forward. We just slice the silicone here, slice the silicone at the back, and that's gonna be it. So ultra simple and fairly straightforward on mounting this thing. All right, tanks are mounted. Fairly straightforward here. You can see the silicone there. Doesn't need to go crazy. And what I did was I put a bead on the underside of the smoke tank, angled it up like this as I put it in, and as I got near the end, it dropped down. And by tomorrow, the silicone will have cured, and that will be rock solid. So nice fuel mounting system here overall. I mean, these screws, they are holding a fair bit of weight with that main tank, but because we put the smoke tank in here, it's sitting against the support structure on top, so nothing's gonna go anywhere with that fuel system. That's exactly what we're looking for. We ran the vent line from the fuel side. This is the tubing that came with the kit, so nice, simple. It comes in, goes straight up to that vent fitting. The smoke system is this side is the vent. You can see we marked it there, and that's just gonna go down to that side. So we do have to be mindful of the cockpit that sits here, but there is enough room to run stuff down there. So we're gonna run the vent line for the smoke system as well. Obviously, we've got to get all that stuff done. All right, guys, and that is everything for the second last video in the Boomerang Super Elan series. Just a reminder, you can get 10% off this kit only while I'm building it. So if you are interested in one of these and you're watching this video right now, when the next video airs, the deal is off. So keep that in mind. If you are interested in one of these aircraft, reach out to Boomerang Jets and let them know that you saw that on the lighter side of RC. Again, limited time only. It's only during the build series of this aircraft. So that's everything, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. And we've got one video left in this series. In the next video, we'll be putting the turbine in and continuing to work our way forward. Basically, turbine install, all the equipment, electronics install that's remaining, battery install, CG, and test run. So 5 things left to finish up this aircraft. If you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button down below if you like the content. Give the video a thumbs up. The YouTube algorithm really likes it. And we'll see ya in the next video.